Hello, hello. This is Steph Lee, founder of Host Agency Reviews. And those of you that listen in often know that this is the Friday 15, where every Friday, 12 p.m. Central Time, we answer your industry questions. You can submit your very own questions for the HAR team and our guests by going to hostagencyreviews.com/Friday15. Or if you're like, I'm never going to remember that, you're totally in my boat. And you can follow the link in the descriptions. So thank you all for joining us today. Again, this is Steph Lee. We have on two other people joining me today. So we have Shayna Zan, the Managing Director of Host Agency Reviews, on again. Hey, Shayna.
Hi.
And then we have Sheila Folk with Travel Industry Solutions. Hello, Sheila.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for having me here today.
Oh, so glad. And those of you that are listening to Sheila, she's actually has a cold right now, and yet she came on to join us. So big thank you for coming on despite feeling not well and sharing with us your wealth of information about the industry.
I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Exactly. Super fun. Super fun.
I like seeing y'all's faces. I don't get to see your faces as often as I would like to.
I hear ya.
Stop it, but say more things like that.
So let's see. We've got a couple questions today we're going to run into in just a second, but just a quick note that for those of you, especially that are listening in on the podcast feed. So this last week on Monday, we dropped a new episode of Travel Agent Chatter, which is our long form podcast where we talk with one advisor that has they're either in a unique niche, but they're all been successful, and we kind of peel apart what has made them successful. We dropped our latest episode, volume 32, with Grace Chamolu, and she is based out of Switzerland. She's a U.S. citizen, so it's great for if you're looking to be like, what would it be like to run my agency abroad when all my clients are North American? So she has great insights on that. She is raising a young family while getting started. And the neat thing is she comes from the product management side of things. And so if you know anything about product management, you're super organized, you have thing, and you're kind of making sure the product is working properly. You're organizing all the teams underneath it. And she ended up doing a lot of time tracking to really streamline her operations and figuring out where she could slim down on the amount of times she was setting things, and that helps her set fees. So there's a lot of interesting information in there. We'll put those links in the show notes for you. Otherwise, if you're listening on the podcast version, Travel Agent Chatter is season 1, so you can just go to season 1 and to the end of it. And if you're on YouTube, there's also a playlist for the Travel Agent Chatter episodes that you can check out. So, but again, follow the link in the description if you're like me and can't remember anything. So, Sheila, let's get into the questions.
Yeah, let's do it. So this one is a long one from Anonymous, but a really great question. So first, she thanks us for all that we do, Steph. So I feel like I just need to shout that out. But the question itself, so I am hitting a wall trying to figure out how to bill for group FIT trips. So to have each person in the group pay individually for each reservation and activity would cause many foreign transaction fees on their credit cards. It's also much easier just to collect one payment per client or one payment in general, and then you can pay to the multiple vendors within that booking or that group. However, I have heard multiple times that this may not be best practice. I called and emailed my host agency about this, and their advice was to talk with other advisors about what they do. But I want to make sure I'm doing things properly. Any advice with regards to payments for groups would be really helpful. So Sheila, I throw that over to you.
Oh boy, this is a really important question. And I really want to start by asking a question, which is, what is your risk tolerance? There's a few things here. So once you start collecting payments into your bank account, you now become the merchant of record, and you have implications around that. So that means you're financially and legally responsible for delivering the travel services. You have to manage disputes, chargebacks, cancellations, refunds, and compliance with consumer protection laws. So that's a huge consideration. The next thing is credentials, insurance, bonds. Do you have a seller of travel registration if it's required by your state or the states in which your clients reside? Do you have errors and emissions insurance, a surety bond if it's required? Do you have a PCI compliant method of collecting and storing all of that credit card data? These really are not optional when you're acting as the merchant of record. They're legally and financially essential for your business. And I want to talk a little bit about the host agency responsibility. That kind of threw me for a loop a little bit because most host agencies do not allow independent contractors to act as merchant of record under their credentials. So if you're using their credentials, the transaction must typically run through your host's system for compliance and also for legal protection. So doing so, otherwise, it can really it can breach your host agency agreement. For anyone out there who is listening to this, who is hosted, you could breach your agreement. You could put their credentials at risk, and you could really create liability for both you and them. All right, so let me think about this just one more thing for one more second. All right, so let's talk about the billing challenges. So I understand, because I am also a travel advisor, that charging each traveler individually can result in those sometimes high foreign transaction fees. And it's really kind of a clunky experience. But centralizing your payments introduces legal risks, which I've already mentioned before. So your merchant of record status, tax implications, and also that potential for misunderstandings or disputes with travelers. So here's what I suggest. Use a supplier or a DMC that can bundle and invoice the group collectively, or the individual travelers, the collective tours, hotels, transfers. Work with a US-based tour operator or consolidator who can accept one payment from you and then pay those international vendors directly. We do have plenty of US-based tour operators who work with individual overseas suppliers. And then you can also explore multi-party payment platforms or suppliers that allow you to collect individual payments, but avoid that excessive transaction fee. Does that make sense? Okay. If you decide to proceed with collecting payments yourself, the biggest thing is have a really strong client agreement outlining your terms, refund and cancellation policies, limits of liability. Have that PCI compliant platform. Make sure you maintain an audit trail for every single transaction, and then also make sure you're not DIYing your agreements. I want to give you just sort of a story. This is a true story about a travel advisor. And I don't know, Steph, you and I may have talked about this in the past. It was a travel advisor who had booked, she was in your situation. She didn't want to have to make all of these individual payments. So she collected the money into her bank account and then paid the suppliers. And the guests were unhappy with one tour inside of the full package. And instead of lodging a complaint about the one tour, she lodged a chargeback, filed a chargeback on the whole trip, and then got all of her friends to also initiate chargebacks on the entire trip. And she was out.
Friend.
Yeah, I know. That's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, it's insane.
These things happen all the time. So you really, really, really need to assess your risk tolerance. Don't take shortcuts for convenience, because I'm telling you, the risk is too high. And if your host cannot support your business model, it might be time to explore alternative structures, like becoming your own accredited agency or working with a tour operator partner who can serve as that merchant of record.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you kind of covered, I had made some bullet points, but you effectively covered anything and everything I would have said. I think the piece for me that to make very clear, and especially because the question, she says she's hosted, or he or she is hosted, is that it is to take payments to your own account. From what I know, and the host agencies that I've worked with in the past, coming from a payments platform, is that taking payment into your own bank account is not allowed, right?
Correct.
That is part of the structure. And so I think that already becomes something that we don't even consider in this regard, especially if you're hosted. Most like to go direct to the supplier, and that is really for merchant of record purposes, if anything were to happen. And suppliers typically like that as well. I mean, I would, and Abby, you can post in the commentary, but to take a look at our tech profiles and tech directories, there are some payment providers in there who work a lot with different hosted advisors. So to understand the process, if you say had these individual pieces where you weren't able to use a DMC or a tour operator, it was very specific, very niche, very FIT, that there are payment providers out there that do understand the flow of funds. So to take a look at them, there are a few of them up within our tech profiles right now, and they can maybe help you too.
And there are a few small, like hybrid boutique host agencies out there. And what I mean by hybrid is that, generally the owner is booking their own travel, and they are accepting payments into their bank account on certain occasions. And they do that to support their advisors as well. But those are few and far between. So, and even if you did that, you really do need to think about your risk tolerance, because if they come back to you, if they do a chargeback, and let's say your host agency has accepted those funds, your host agency is going to come to you to look for a reimbursement.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, I mean, that is probably one of the best answers I have heard to a question like this, because I know that this is being asked more and more. So thank you. And then got one more. So
hold on. Can I add a few things to this?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I know that there was a lot of things talked about for those of you that are newer. So I want to, number one, drop some resources in on some of the terms you might not be familiar with. So one of those is FIT, which is really just custom travel, but we'll link to our article that explains what that is. Sheila mentioned the seller of travel, or SOT laws. And essentially those are really complicated to get into now, but essentially what the thing is the states want to know who the travel agencies are, who are behind them, so that if there is where a travel agency goes out of business or something along those lines, they'll be able to see who owns the travel agency and where the money was going. Because if you think about a travel agency, and in Minnesota, there was a famous agency that went under like this, but you can take people's money if you're having cash flow problems, and you can put it in your bank account, but not pay the supplier, and your client isn't going to know, if you give them a fake itinerary and things like that. So that's kind of the reasoning behind the seller of travel laws is they want to make sure that you're registered in their state. So we'll link to that. The errors and omissions insurance, we'll link to an article on that. And DMCs, which is the destination management companies, they're the on-the-ground people that have all the resources in destination because they live there and work there. But there's a few resources too that I'll point out. One is Sheila talked about the importance of the terms and conditions that you have. And Sheila's product, Travel Industry Solutions, like part of it is they do legal templates. So we'll, of course, link to Travel Industry Solutions profile on the site, as well as their website for you to check out. But there's also the opportunity, if you wanted to go to a travel industry attorney, to have them write up your terms and conditions.
Mhm.
We'll link to our article that lists all of the travel industry attorneys out there. And then there's two things. One is we have a blog on credit card processing for travel agencies, like 101, that was written by a travel industry attorney. That's going to be really helpful for you for understanding kind of the legal responsibilities that Sheila talked about when you're the merchant of record and what your responsibilities are.
Mhm.
And then there's also one we'll link to just as a resource about travel waivers and how to protect your agency better. But I think the big thing to keep in mind is that when you start taking payments into your own account, when you're hosted, you also are doing risk when you own your own accreditation, but when you're with a host, you may be violating,
Mhm.
like Sheila said, your host agreement or state laws. So that's something to be aware of. But yeah, those are, we'll also link, because one of the other dangers is, and I actually haven't heard of this happening. Maybe you have, Sheila or Shayna, but there's a difference between tour operators and travel agencies. And for like specifically errors and emissions insurance, your
Huge.
insurance rates are going to go up if you're a tour operator. And so you want to make sure you're fitting the right definition. And if you're doing FIT custom tours, but you're not using an intermediary and you're actually processing all these payments yourself, and then paying everything out, you may be seen more as a tour operator. If you get an E&O or errors and emissions insurance claim, they're going to come back to you, and as they're investigating it, they're going to be like, wait, you're not a travel agent, you're actually a tour operator. So
And
there's a lot of legal ramifications about
And I
that.
will tell you that because we have a lot of conversations with one of the big E&O companies out there, they are denying claims even if you are putting down the wrong sales volume amount or the commission amount. They're also denying claims right off the bat if you were classified as a travel agent versus a tour operator. So you have to pay really, really, really close attention to that. That's a real key component. Also, don't forget, Steph, we do have the group contracts coming out.
Oh, that's
Hopefully
right.
in a couple
Yeah.
of weeks. So real group travel contracts. And I did want to mention that if you are going to be the merchant of record, let's say you go out on your own, this is something that we've talked about internally. It's a little more complex to develop, but having those upstream contracts. So upstream contracts with the suppliers. So what does that look like? How does their liability come into play? When you are acting as merchant of record and you're removing sort of that supplier piece out of your terms and conditions. And then our fraud detection tool is built. It is ready to go. And that'll launch at
Yeah.
the same time as the group and wedding stuff. So we'll
And
let
when
you
is this? And when did you say, like a
know.
month?
Right now, the platform that we're using for subscription management has a code freeze for the next 2 weeks. So we can't deploy anything, but it's there. So we're ready on
Cool.
our side. We're just waiting on them. So once I get back from Travel Agent Forum.
Cool. Well, the last thing we'll link to is we did a past Friday 15 episode about the difference between a tour operator and a travel agency. So we'll link to that in the description and the show notes. You'll definitely want to listen to that. All right, and that's all I had.
Yeah.
Just
These Friday
17 things.
15s are more like Friday 25s, and I love it. No, I absolutely love it. This one I think will be a bit of a quicker answer, but if it's not, it's not. You know, we have a lot to share, and
Important
as we
stuff.
should. I completely agree. Okay, so the last question is: I'm a relatively new advisor, and I'm trying to understand the concept of leads. My host agency, which I love, does not have a lead gen program. And I would really like to see how lead generation works and practice using my training and skills with a mock lead. Do you know of programs or practice websites, workbooks for this, or how I might generate real leads on my own in the future? And this is from Lisa.
Okay. I have very strong feelings about this. First, let me start by saying there are host agencies that do provide you with leads. And there are some good ones. Just keep in mind that when you are being provided a lead by your host agency, typically your commission split is going to be much lower on your end. So it might be like a 30-70 split, 30 you, 70 your host agency, and they will assign you a coach in many cases and walk you through the sales process and how to work those leads. You also have some consortium out there that also provide leads to you, whether you are affiliated direct or your host agency is affiliated with that consortium. So you do have an opportunity to get leads. There is work around that, though. If you're going to use some of their platforms, you've got to get reviews. You've got to work with their SEO people to really fine tune your agency profile so you're attracting the right customers that are the right fit for your skill set and your agency. So they do exist. It does take time. I believe that all of us have leads in our back pocket that we aren't thinking about. As a matter of fact, I did a webinar for HAR on how to find clients. And then we did an extended webinar after that. I think this was last week, on how to leverage people that you know to get the right type of leads. I guarantee if you go back to your, first roommate that you had in XYZ dorm at university, her brother works at a place that needs, someone to help with incentive travel. You can literally connect the dots and go back into your Rolodex of the people that you know in your life. I think one of the first customers I had was like my father's brother's, coworker or something weird like that. Mm-hmm. So I leveraged my network to get them to spread the word about what I was doing. There are so many ways that you can get leads by just getting out from behind your computer and networking. So that's how I feel about the finding leads. Now, it's not about selling. It's about helping. The more that you help somebody, let's say you go to an event on how to build your personal wealth. You have a local conference, how to build your personal wealth. You're going to learn something about how to build your personal wealth, and you're probably going to interact with people there at lunch or at round tables who are interested in building their personal wealth, which will give them additional monies to travel. So naturally, you can bring up what it is that you do. So start by being interested in the other person. Don't sell, offer help. That's a great way to take the pressure off of yourself to immediately convert somebody into a sale. There's tons and tons of sales training resources out there, even outside of our industry. First, start with your host agency. Many of the host agencies have programs, sales boot camps, what have you. Dale Carnegie has great sales training. Look at some of the inspirational speakers. Even like Simon Sinek has the art of presenting. And while it may not be sales, it'll fine tune and hone your presentation skills. I bet you, and I haven't looked at some of the training in a while, maybe Shayna or Steph, you guys have, but I know Google even has a ton of free training online on like different marketing and technical skills. And I don't know if there's anything around sales training. So that's what I have to say about that.
I was going to say, only because I'm going to say co-hosted, I introduced Sheila before she did her hour-long webinar last week. This is exactly what her webinar spoke to. We'll link it. It lives in our YouTube channel, but we'll link it here for you all as well. really take a listen. She gives so many different pieces of advice with regards to quote unquote leads, or just the people that you're around every day, the interests that you have, right? And how quickly that turns into, oh, so you book travel. Well, you know what? I love running. I've always wanted to do the Berlin Marathon. Could you help me organize that? It's incredible how quickly those things can happen when you build that relationship because of this niche, or, you both are in the same run club or whatever it may be. But I would highly recommend, definitely take a listen in on the webinar we did last week, because it is, Lisa, it is all about this. So really hits home on this topic. Steph, anything you want to add?
Yes, couple, as always, resources. So one, we have an article on leads, Lisa, that's going to be helpful to you. It talks about leads, things you should be thinking about, because there's certain things like you'll want to know. Is the commission split going to be different for leads with my host agency? Who does that lead belong to? Which means when you leave the agency, is that yours and you get to take it? Or does that stay with your host agency when you go? You'll also want to know how many leads you can expect. It's going to vary based on your specialty. But so we'll link to our leads article, and we do have some resources for you in terms of knowing how to talk to leads. So let me share my screen really quickly, because one, on our profiles, while I'm pulling this up, on our profiles, there are the host profiles will have something with leads on there. And in the more filters, you can filter by if a host agency offers leads or not. But here on our YouTube channel, so if you type in the word qualifying, we did a series where we asked, here's how to qualify clients, and it kind of walks you through the steps. But there's also videos on this is Becca Fleisch, Sun and Fun qualifying video. So it's an actual video that she's recorded with her clients. They've asked ahead of time. So you can see the questions that they're asking. Here's one on European cruises with Denise Lawrenson. And then a honeymoon client qualifying example from Nikki Miller. So check that out, because they're going to give you actual where you're stepping in with an advisor. And that's really helpful. This one, Engaging the theater of the mind, how to qualify for Sun and Fun vacations, is another one that's been really popular. So check those out on the YouTube channel. We'll try to put the individual links in there too, but if you can't find those, just type in the word qualifying. And that's about all I have, Lisa. I think between everybody, we covered everything. So
I think so. Well, happy Friday 15/Friday 30 to you all. And Sheila, thank you so much. Honestly, had you not told us that you weren't feeling well, I don't think anyone would have known, especially the passion that you had for answering you were like, I have a lot of thoughts on leads, right? And I loved it.
Well, you guys might not have me back again, because we always go past the 15. But
it's not you, it's me.
And it's Steph's fault. It's not yours. Don't worry.
There's one common denominator on every show, and it's me.
Okay. I'll let you take that one, Steph.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope everyone enjoys. We are here every Friday with a different and wonderful guest speaker. Thank you, Sheila, so much for joining us and the detail. And we'll see you all next Friday.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.